Oh, what a condition we're in. What a pitiful pass we've come to. And I didn't know 4 years ago next week that what happened to me in the succeeding hours, days, and weeks was going to, in fact, happen to much of the world. Mine was almost a test case. I've never denied what I said was foolish, but it was not driven by anti-Semitism, because my Jewish friends would not be here if they thought for a second I was anti-Semitic. But I was asked by the Irish edition of the Sunday Times to write about the difference in pay between women in the BBC and men. I said, for 2 days I didn't want to write the article. And finally I submitted. I did research into the people concerned, whose names meant nothing to me. And I discovered that the two best paid women in the BBC were both Jewish broadcasters. And I genuinely meant it as a compliment, that they were able to negotiate a good deal for them. And I said, you know, under-negotiating for yourself is a lost with all hands stupidity. And I was really glad for them that they were able to negotiate a good deal for them. That column was filed 24 hours early, midday on Thursday. On Friday midday, I got a phone call a text message or an email from my page editor, John Burns, asking me, this is what he said. Now, John Burns is not an anti-Semite. He was making a joke, as he might do, about Catholics or Protestants or Presbyterians. He said, are Jews sure they're Jews? It meant there was no malice there. It was just a casual thing, and I didn't use that language back. I said, yes, I am sure of their Jewish origins. That was Friday midday. It was viewed by the page editor and by the editor of the Irish edition of the Sunday Times. It then went to London, where 3 people viewed it on the Friday evening. We know this. They had all Saturday to see that I had made a mistake in identifying these 2 women as Jews. It was a compliment, but it was a compliment that didn't work. What happened inside the Sunday Times in the later hours of that Saturday, the last Saturday of July 2017, and the last Saturday of my career as a columnist, was that somebody within the Sunday Times clearly alerted people in London to the fact that a misogynistic, anti-Semitic rant was in the pages of the Sunday Times. It appeared 1 minute past midnight on that Sunday morning, the last Sunday morning of July. Within 1 minute, a woman in London had accessed the Irish edition of the Sunday Times, had read my column. It's very difficult to do that. There are 8 or 9 different editions of the Sunday Times. She went to the Irish edition, found my column, and was tweeting about the misogynistic, anti-Semitic vileness of the Sunday Times, of the column by Kevin Myers. By 12:30, 20 or 30 other people were leaping in about a column they could not possibly have read unless they had paid enough money to get past the bay bar, which I don't believe they did. At about 8:30, I was in West Cork, attending the West Cork History Festival that Sunday morning. At 8:30, I was just getting up. I got a phone call from my page editor, John Burns, saying, you're in trouble. And I said, what for? I had made a derogatory remark about a male performer called Jeremy Vine. I'd called him a jackanapes. I had said that a large number of male performers were vastly outpaid. I assumed that the overpayment that I had attributed to the male performers might have been the cause for uproar, because nothing I had said could otherwise have caused uproar, certainly not about the 2 Jewish women. Within another half an hour, by 9 o'clock, my career was over. By 11 o'clock, the Sunday Times had issued a statement publicly denouncing me as an anti-Semite, saying that I would never be employed by any newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch ever for the rest of my life, as if I had been a secret Nazi. Well, it got worse. I didn't think it could get worse by noon that day, because my sister-in-law rang me from Cumbria to say that I was the lead item on the BBC News, followed by not so important North Korean missile strike over the island of Guam. So that came second to me being sacked as an anti-Semite by the Sunday Times. Within an hour or two, somebody had found, and we know from the tweeting that went on that afternoon, that they were using a LexisNexis search engine to find out material for me, about me. And someone discovered that I had written 9 years before an article talking about the Holocaust, and as Morris here has said a day later, he said that Kevin Myers has written more about the Holocaust than any other Irish journalist, and he has told the Irish people truths about the Holocaust, truths, remember that word, that they would not otherwise have known. But I had said in that article in the Irish Independent in 2009, 8 years before, that I was a Holocaust denier in this sense, that most of the Jews who were murdered by the Third Reich in the final solution were not murdered in the death camps of Poland, Auschwitz, Belzec, Chelmno, Treblinka. I know these names. They're almost engraved in my heart because I've been writing about them for so many years. Most of the Jews who were murdered in situ by Einsatzkommando, as they're called, also Einsatzgruppen, of the Wehrmacht, the German army, who's got off scot-free on this charge. They killed millions of Jews, as did the SS, as did many Lithuanians, many Latvians, Ukrainians. Romanians got off scot-free. They killed 200,000 Jews in Bessarabia. This was a Europe-wide endeavor, not just Nazi, to kill the Jews. Now, I've known this many years. I've written about it many times. To call me a Holocaust denier is to deny everything I am. And that happened. By 5 o'clock that evening, and I think now acting on orders from the IRA Army Council, Roy Greenslade of The Guardian denounced me as an anti-Semite, a misogynist, and a Holocaust denier. He's been sacked, he said, good, long overdue. Roy Greenslade has since admitted that he has been an agent of the IRA. That day he was doing IRA's business. Now, anyone in this tent would know my opinions about the IRA. But it worked. It worked. By Monday morning, I was a world-famous character as an anti-Semitic, Holocaust-denying misogynist. And then the newspaper columns came in. Now, at this point, no one was tweeting in my defense. And I thought newspaper columnists would say, well, this is clearly mad. We know this man. I am well known to other journalists, not as well. You wouldn't know me as well other journalists know me. And then not one of them could have said, produce a scintilla of evidence that I was any of the things I was being accused of. And they became concrete facts in the world. People who had never heard of Kevin Myers knew that he was a Holocaust denier, knew he was an anti-Semite, knew he hated women. By Tuesday morning, I was interviewed on Sean O'Rourke. I had gone 2 nights without sleep. I was incredulous, as would you, any of you have been incredulous, when you have been accused of the opposite of what you actually are. And the Irish Times columnists were piling in to say what a vile person I was. Irish Independent columnists were saying the same. It went across the board. Every single newspaper columnist in the world, just about, certainly everyone in Ireland, was getting into the destruction of Kevin Myers' reputation. Cathy O'Sheridan entirely misquoted me, entirely misrepresented me, and said that I had said women were shirkers, lazy, incompetent, who never turned up for work, and so on. I never said any of those things, but I did cite a fact that's disputable about whether I use it, but it's a universal fact, which you can check when you get home. Check this evening when you go outside and get onto one of the mobile internet machines you people have, and I don't. You'll see that across the board in Western Europe, in North America, women take 40% more sick leave than men. That's a kind of normal thing. It's a normative thing. But it didn't make any difference. And the destruction of my reputation continued in the Irish media for 6 weeks. But the most damaging and wicked thing was said on Morning Ireland at 8:30 on the Monday morning when an RTE interview, who I'm not going to name now, interviewed a man from London. She said, Kevin Myers has written denying the Holocaust before, an entire article denying the Holocaust took place. And what do you think of that? And he said, well, of course he did. He's an anti-Semite. That became official truth. It was emanated from a license subsidized, therefore in the popular mind, government authorized outlet in Ireland. That went around the world. Then Leo Varadkar, Taoiseach, joined in the destruction of the reputation and the livelihood and the very persona of an Irish citizen. Contrary to what you might think, I only have one citizenship. It is Irish. One passport. It is Irish. One Taoiseach. Irish who let me down. In the entire history of the state, no government has ever turned on an Irish citizen the way the Irish government turned on me. He was joined within 24 hours, that same afternoon, as if it was agreed policy, by Frances Fitzgerald, then Taoiseach, who denounced me as an anti-Semite and a misogynist. She didn't throw in the Holocaust denier, nor did Joan Burton when she joined in, then leader of the Labour Party. Now, the funny thing is, when I had met both women previously, in the previous 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 months, we both exchanged kisses. I'd kissed Frances Fitzgerald. I'd kissed Joan Burton. They had kissed me. And now they were calling me a misogynist and an anti-Semite. I mean, you can't make this kind of stuff up. The fact that Roy Greenslade, a known agent of the IRA, should have been so central to this, should have rung alarm bells in newspaper offices. The fact that what was clearly not true had become a truth should have been the kind of thing that other journalists would traditionally have said, hold on, there's something suspicious here. How did this thing start? I didn't know myself that the tweets had started at 2 minutes past 12. I got a woman specialist to find out to do an analysis. She came back to me and said, this is simply incredible. There is no way this could have happened naturally. This is something that any reputable journalist, any reputable newspaper would have gone after. They said, this is the truth. Kevin Myers is not what these media people are saying, not what the Twitters people are saying. So therefore, what is going on? Government people might have asked, what is going on? Nobody asked that question then, that week, that year, or in the intervening 4 years. The only person to have written about this is me, just about. I will tell you, and I don't say this in any self-pity because I'm a man of certain age. And, I had not a career ahead of me, and I had not got a young family to support, and I hadn't got a mortgage to settle. But my life has irreversibly been changed, and my reputation has been irreversibly damaged. I had a memoir coming out. It had to be postponed because of this, and then it had to be postponed by my legal action against RTE. RTE refused to accept it was wrong, rejected the finding by the Independent Broadcasting Commission that they had wronged me. The Commission said Kevin Myers' his known position on the Holocaust is quite clear. It is not possible to call this man a Holocaust denier. RTE publicly rejected it. So then I had to sue, and my advice was never sue for libel because they will destroy you in the first week of being cross-examined in the courts. So I spent a year waking up every morning at 2 o'clock in the morning because my legal advice was if I lost, I would lose everything. Everything. My home, my pension fund. And it would, a throw of a dice might just depend on a bad judge and a bad jury. But as it happened, I came across a document, an internal document from RTE, delivered to me into my hands by great good fortune, saying, Kevin Myers is not a Holocaust denier. Kevin Myers has written more about this than anybody else, etc., etc., etc. We presented this document to RTE's counsel. They folded. Brian Dobson was appointed by RT to read out a full and unconditional apology, including the line that Kevin Myers has written more about the Holocaust than anyone else in the history of Irish journalism. I assumed RTE News would then report that settlement. It never did. It never once. If you missed that slot at 5 to 8, 5 to 9, that Monday morning in December, 2 years ago, you would never have known the settlement had been reached with large damages and all costs paid for by RTE and a full public apology. It was never repeated on RTE News. It was never repeated by the Irish Times. It was never reported by the Irish Times. And we didn't, or the Irish Independent. We didn't ask the Irish Independent a small piece. Irish Times didn't report it. Even though we sent a news desk with a full digest of the hearing and the outcome and RTE's statement. The Irish Times never reported it. I was with the Irish Times for 25 years. I used an Irishman's diary for many purposes. One, to oppose the IRA, and two, to re-establish the position of Irish soldiers in the Great War. And that I was successful. But the Irish Times has since written me out of... thank you. The Irish Times has written me out of its history. So I wrote to the chairman of the Irish Times and the chairman of the Irish Times Trust. They're two separate bodies, but one man links them both, Professor John Hegarty, saying the Irish Times has got a noble tradition defined by its constitution, and it cannot be discharging that obligation by ignoring a truth essential to this. RTE is a licensed, subsidized organization. People like us pay for it. It cannot justify the telling of untruths and the publication of silence about me by a former employee of the Irish Times. I never got a word in reply. So my memoir was delayed again by the court action, and then it was delayed initially by COVID, and then COVID came out, and the book came out the same day as COVID lockdown came. But I had been invited onto Claire Byrne radio show, and the Claire Byrne radio show said, we'll talk to Kevin Myers about this, we'll give him a large slot, but you must, she said to the publishers, you must give a complete undertaking that he will not appear on any other radio show that week during the daytime. That means nobody else. We get the exclusive. And my publisher gave that undertaking to the Claire Byrne show producer. Claire Byrne, I don't know what role she had in what happened afterwards. The day before, we gave the undertaking. We were not going to do anybody else. We said no to every other radio program on other networks. And the day before my broadcast, it was cancelled. Unilaterally and without any explanation. Now, I thought then this was a grotesque injustice. It is and remains a grotesque injustice, which I don't have to explain to any one of you. It's so self-obvious. And I thought that was something unique to me, and it wasn't. It's happened to Owen Harris 2 months ago. It's happened to people all over the world whose names we don't know. It's happened to countless people in America. It's happened to university lecturers. It's happened to Yale professors. It's happened to newspaper editors. It happens the whole time. People are destroyed for things that they believe, things they don't believe, but they might have been misinterpreted on. Two of the great advantages of what happened to me were the discovery of Thomas Sowell, who is a wonderful, wonderful writer, and René Girard. Thomas Sowell is still alive. Sowell is S-O-W-E-L-L. I urge you to look up his name. And René Girard, who's a French philosopher who died in 2005. René Girard is a miracle amongst men. A tower of intellect and integrity and insight. He's an anthropologist, was an anthropologist and a philosopher. And he came up with the extraordinary notion, which is entirely true, to my mind anyway. In the long, long 500,000 dark years of the Paleolithic, when we were emerging from apehood into what we are today, we created sensitive communities by two powerful forces. One is what's called mimesis, which is a Greek word. It's mimicry. We copy one another. It's in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, or ox, or cattle. That means you want something that somebody else has. You want those things not just because you want them because somebody else has them. We copy one another. We copy one another's styles. Everyone here is wearing a kind of clothing pioneered by somebody else. We wear things to make ourselves look approximately to within our tribe. We want to be distinctive, but within a group. We copy one another the whole time. Football fans copy one another. Everyone does around the world. This is not defined and confined by anybody. I would do the same thing and have done the same thing. That's one element in creating this thing, this human society. And the other element is scapegoating. Finding somebody who doesn't quite belong and making an example of him. That is to say, killing him or her. We were, when we arrived in the Homo habilis, or any of the early homos, including Neanderthal, who's a cousin of ours, we were the most violent species that has ever existed on the earth, and we remain the most violent species that has ever existed on this earth. And one of the expressions we had of forming a society, was forming bonding groups, was to find an outsider and to sacrifice him. Now, I have to tell you, if you think the outsider is a perfect example, was there in 2017 a finer example in public life of an outsider than myself, with my accent, my background, my opinions, my defense of the Catholic Church when everyone else was turning against the Catholic Church, my opinions against the IRA. I was wrong on so many fronts for my enemies. But this is a norm, finding an outsider and killing the outsider and feeling elevated, feeling morally rewarded, feeling emotionally greater, feeling triumphant as you go away, having kicked the corpse into fragments. That's a universal reaction of early man and woman in all societies. And the issue of innocence did not arise, according to Girard. The concept of innocence did not arise. And the first people to invent the notion of innocence were the Jews. And Abraham, and the sacrifice of an animal rather than his son. And the notion then, it wasn't necessary to kill a human being to achieve unity. And what you have there is the Trinity. The Trinity that remains within our souls, within our DNA, within all who we are. The DNA we take to outer space, we take to the bottom of the world, we take to a football match, we take to here. That Trinity is a very dangerous Trinity. But we love Trinities. Faith, hope, and charity. Jesus rose on the third day. The Olympics have 3 rings. The shamrock has 3 leaves. 3 is terribly important. And 3 is, in a sense, our primal number. People think that the power of 10 is what governs us. No, but not really. In the early days of counting, it was 12. You used your thumb to count the bones on your first finger. That means you can count 3. 3, 3, 3, 3. That's 12. Having got to 12, you count this thumb. So you can count to multiples of each 12, bringing you to 144. So 3 is a primal number. 3 is a number to which we respond. 3 is a number we recognize. It's within our souls. It's in our DNA. It's in our cultural DNA as well. And so too, to a lesser form, is 144, what used to be called a gross. The older ones of you will remember a gross. Gross is why grocers are called grocers, because they would buy in bulk, and the unit they bought in was a gross. But 144 remained a common number in all societies until quite recently, until the decimal system replaced it. It's not coincidental that when tweet was invented 15 years ago last week, What did they introduce the limit of words on a tweet? 140 actually. 44 would have been a little bit too awkward because it doesn't divide by 10. So 140 combines the two systems of the early primitive dozen. We have a code name for 12, as we don't for 10. And then we had the murder of George Floyd last year. No one who's seen that murder would dispute that it was murder, would dispute it was horrific, wholly unjustified. We don't need to discuss the flawed personal characteristics of George Floyd himself. Whatever he was and whatever he had been, he didn't deserve a death like that. Was it an exercise of white privilege? Well, I have read repeatedly that it was. Well, the problem with that is two of the arresting officers, one of them is a mixed race, Asian and black, and the other is from Laos. So it's not this Derek, whatever his name is, it's gone. Yeah. He's a terrible man. 18 previous disciplinary hearings against him, which had been dismissed by the police in Minneapolis. His death was identical to that of Tony Tampa in Florida. Tony Tampa was mentally deranged, diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, overweight. He rang the police from a shopping mall in Texas. He said, "I'm losing it here. I need someone to control me. I might cause damage to somebody." The police sent a patrol car. He was arrested, as can happen in America. It's incomprehensible. And was handcuffed and was put on the ground. And the police arrived. And this is on video. I've seen it. A police officer knelt on his back. And Tony Tampa said, you're killing me. I can't breathe. And knelt on his back until Tony Tampa dies online. You can see it yourself. The same thing happened to Cedric Chauviat, a Paris delivery driver during the Yellow Vests movement. The gendarmes, or one of the police, knelt on his back. He said, "I can't breathe." So knelt on his neck and killed him. Of course, they weren't black. And that was the issue. And the fundamental issue of America, of all societies, is the complexity is hidden by simple headline declarations of the truth. And headline declarations of the truth do one thing: they conceal the truth. Nothing you can learn about any society will be told in a single line. You all know what complex lives you have. You all know the things you think that you shouldn't think. You do the things you shouldn't do. At the end of the day, you come out a reasonably good person, but you know the bad side of you. You've all known the bad side of you. So you can't be defined, you individually can't be defined by a single sentence. How can a country of the United States of America be defined by a single line? But that's what happened. And most extraordinarily, the media joined in. And Black Lives Matter, which is an outright communist organization, supporting communist structures, not communism economically, but communism culturally, became one of the most famous and popular movements in the world. The day before yesterday, you wouldn't have heard this because it wasn't reported, Black Lives Matter came out in support of the regime in Cuba, which demonstrations are finally beginning against, this communist cartel which has ruled Cuba for 60 years. The most extraordinary thing is that the Cuban Communist Party is the quintessential party of apartheid. 80% of the population of Cuba is black. But you will never see a representative of the Cuban Communist Party who is black, or you might see a token one. It is the perfect example of racial prejudice. All top jobs in Cuba go to white men and white women, mostly white men. All autocracies, ruthless autocracies, are ruled by men. You don't see women there. Not yet, anyway. Your day might come. You never know. So, I'm going to say a couple of things to you which you would not normally get in the press. You wouldn't have got the truth in the Irish versus the Irish availability, what is available to you, that the Black Lives Matter, BLM, not coincidental that it's Trinity. All of these things have a Trinity, BBC, UTEV, RTE, RTE. The truth matters. The truth matters. 3 words. RTE, 3 letters. The power of three is incredibly powerful, incredibly compelling. Now, the thing about the George Floyd killing is that to ask the truth, to suggest the truth, is to court accusations of racism. And at that point, you can't discuss anything. If you're called a xenophobe, a misogynist, a race hater, it's over. That's the evidence, the allegation, it's the truth. The jury, the judge will all agree you're guilty. No further evidence is needed. The accusation will do it. One of the many allegations that came out about George Floyd, which weren't repeated in the press, you have to do the homework on the FBI website. I ask you to look it up, FBI homicide. It's incredibly valuable, incredibly meticulous, and it's very helpful in the way it tells you not to double count. More white men are killed by the police in America every year. Twice as many white men as black men. But that doesn't tell the other truth, that the black population of America is 13% and the white population is 77%. So the population of the killings by blacks are disproportionately large. I want to get the figures absolutely right there because I've got them written down here. For murders in America by white men, who constitute 77% of the male population, murders are 3,650, and by black men, 4,000. Murders by black men outnumber murders by white men, and the population ratio is 77% to 13%. What we have here, just another fact that I'll give you, yes, a very disturbing fact. 2,000 women a year are murdered in America. 745 of them are black. These are terrible figures. The large proportion of black women who are murdered by men are murdered by black men. We have matrices of disaster, of social disaster, which suggest that the black community, not all of it, but much of it, is in a state of crisis, which is not helped by funding and by lies by the media. A headline came out last year that 2 million Americans had bought rifles in the year 2017. That's more than enough to equip the armies of the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Germany. And that was a headline fact. But the more interesting fact is that you're 7 times more likely to be knifed to death in California than you are to be shot by a rifle. So rifle ownership in itself doesn't tell you anything at all about who is responsible for murders. And in the madness of last year, in which about 30 Americans were killed during the George Floyd riots, every city just about north of the Mason-Dixie line was destroyed, and much of Atlanta south of the Mason-Dixie line was destroyed. "24,000 people were arrested by a police that were very anxious not to arrest anybody, and 124 days of paralysis half destroyed the American economy. Nothing like it has ever been seen in the American history since the Civil War. Yet an extraordinary thing happened, which now brings us to the secondary point about the truth and COVID. 2,000 health workers last summer wrote a petition saying that anti-Trump rioters or demonstrators need not wear masks in public, but everybody else could. These are not undergraduates, these are all professionals. These were refuting their own scientific truth. This didn't make a headline at all. I had to search to find it. Jane Fonda, this time last year, said, "Thank God for COVID. It's given liberalism a second wind." Had Trump said anything as brutal about that, about an event which had taken, at that point, 500,000 lives, what would the journalists have been doing? They wouldn't have been doing anything. Not interested in the truth. They're not interested in even far greater truth than Trump. And Trump is a despicable man. We don't need to discuss him. Is he much worse than Biden? No, I don't think so. Is he much worse than Barack Obama? No, I don't think so. Nobody else has watched a man being shot dead on his orders as Barack Obama did, surrounded by his Secretary of State and his Vice President, watched live footage of Osama bin Laden being assassinated by a SEAL team led by an Irish American called Murphy. But the issues of the world today, the big issues that are going to confront our children and our grandchildren and make our lives, or make our societies unrecognizable, are the twin issues of immigration, the related issue of the collapse of Africa, and the demographic collapse of almost all Western European societies, and also, by extension, Japan, and possibly even China, but certainly Russia. What we need to do as mammals, or any reproductive species, is to fulfill the existing quota, to manage replacement levels. Unless we do that, we're doomed. That's it. Now, I have to tell you, I'm guilty in that regard. I never had any children. I thought life was good. I was put on this earth to have pleasure. And I look back with a kind of degree of pleasureful shame at the fact that I didn't do the duty to my society, my community that raised me. The Myers family had 6 children. My mother lost 2 in addition. All of the overall, of the 6 children she had, we haven't produced replacement levels. And this is true for most of your families. It's true for Britain. The British are not reproducing. The population of London is now only 45% British born, and children born in London hospitals, only 1/3 of them are British. That's a one-way traffic. It's a motorway without any return journey. That's it. You can pass the cafeteria on one level, on one side, there won't be a cafeteria on the other. Populations are going to fall. At the same time, every single African society is collapsing without question. Ethiopia is now gone. It's conducting a civil war, it's causing hundreds of thousands of refugees, and we're going to hear from Turkey very soon that we need to put in more money into Ethiopia, which we've been doing for 30 years. We in Ireland pay for the education of Ugandan school children, while the Ugandan Air Force, 400 miles from the sea, has 2 squadrons of Sukhoi Mach 2 maritime fighters. They've got no sea to protect, they've got 2 squadrons, and we haven't got a single fighter squadron of any kind to defend a single square inch of Irish airspace or Irish land. But we can give children in Uganda an education. For what purpose, I don't know. The Department of Foreign Affairs website says it gives us soft power. Or whatever the fuck that means. See, it was the 1968 was a year when Humanae Vitae was rejected across the world as a comic turn by the Catholic Church in the last effort to hold up the authority of the Catholic Church. It's an appalling, confusing document. I've read it many times. I still can't make head or tail of it. But what is the central truth of existence? Why is sex so pleasurable? Why would a woman ever have sex again after having given birth to a child? It's because it is pleasurable, it's fun, it's nice being with your husband, etc., etc. Or maybe your husband makes you. One way or another, the human species has to produce, for every single woman on this earth, 2.1 to make up for infertility, for homosexuality, for unhappiness, for people, single people, whatever. That's the obligation as mammals. Now, any woman who wants to become a professional and doesn't want to raise children, well, somebody else is going to make up the leeway. But that's not happening. Even in China, where women are now allowed to have more than one child. Well, so many women have discovered the pleasures of not having children. They've discovered contraceptive methods so that they can have sexual pleasure without the outcome. This is a denial of reality, a biological reality. We cannot, as a species, turn our back on biological realities. A grass in a savanna that decides simply to be a mute grass and not grow any other grass will soon be replaced by a kindred grass in that same savanna. And that's what's going to happen in Europe. Now, it's not an issue of race. It's a fact. It's a thing. I was talking to a friend about this last week. I said, immigration is certain on a large scale, not merely because of the collapse of African societies, but it's a certainty because we are running out of people. As we already know, we have a very large number of people who are refusing to work. And we bring in people from all over Europe who do the work and who are willing to work. Maybe they'll pick up Irish ways and learn not how to work. Or learn not how to work. Anyway, but the fact is, we are now bound on a cycle where we have to import more people and more people and more people. And most important of all, we don't ask questions. We don't ask questions, as Declan was saying yesterday, about why our government has been so passive. No, we are so mute and passive before our government and our slave media. Just as an example of when I wrote about this about 6 years ago, I expected a storm, but I got the opposite of the storm, the silence, which is even more deadly because that means there's nothing to respond to. I did an analysis of doctors in Ireland, and 6 years ago, then, it'll be worse now, the most common name amongst all doctors, men and women, amongst practicing doctors in Ireland, was Mohammed. That's the most popular name of Irish doctors. So we are seeing a transformation of a medical profession, which we are not discussing. It's the most central issue. We don't discuss anything. And Brenda was asked about the National Women's Council and what she thought of it, and she obviously was caught on the hop. My personal experience with National Women's Council is as follows. They denounced me as a misogynist 4 years ago, plus a week. 2 weeks later, Ali Salim, who's was a lecturer at Trinity College and also a theologian at the big mosque in it'll come to me in a second. Say it again? Clonskeen Mosque. He was on RTE television calling for legalization of female genital mutilation in Ireland. And he described, it doesn't matter whether it's for cosmetic reasons or for whatever reasons, but we should be allowing it in Ireland. What did the National Women's Council of Ireland say about that? What? Nothing at all. Misrepresented column by me, denunciation by many feminists and the National Women's Council, one of the great quangos, the single group, advocacy group, paid for by the government, 1,000 of them, as Declan was saying yesterday. No, 1,000 in Ireland. 1,000 I think. But 1,000 will do. 100,000, I'm going home, stop talking. So we have the single issue advocacy group promoting things called equality, which I don't know what that means, because which person is look to the person next to you. Is she or he equal to you in any single regard? In appearance, in smell, in affections, in animal lusts or lack of animal lusts, in shape of toenails? In what regard? Is anybody sitting next to you the same as you? Equal in what do they have the same as you? Possibly a voting right, but in a different constituency. So it really doesn't make any difference. We aren't equal. It's a great lie. You put that equal to equality and brotherhood and what's the freedom? It makes it a permanent virtue. If I'm free not to be equal to you, and I'm free not to be your brother. Isn't that the case? Isn't that obvious? I mean, this trinity remains inviolable in Western civilization. Freedom, brotherhood, and equality. But if I am free, I'm free to reject the other two. And if I'm equal, then I'm not your brother, because no two brothers have ever said, you're the same as me. Two brothers is called sibling envy. So that's a basic mechanic in human existence. Oh yeah, I knew there was another one I wanted to talk to you about. Two things. See, I'm not the only journalist who was destroyed, and Owen Harris was done, as you know, a couple of months ago, for doing what everyone else does, tweeting, using the formula of 140 letters. You know, we're so basic we use those kind of code. We inherited that from the early Paleolithic. But Suzanne Moore of The Guardian, I thought was untouchable. I didn't like Suzanne Moore. I didn't read any of her articles. All her articles were nasty, hardline feminists and very abusive about men. But I wouldn't stop her writing. She's allowed to abuse me. She's allowed to say things that I find deeply offensive. That's called freedom. We can't depend on one another's feelings for proper approval of what's said. So I disliked her. But what happened to her was really astonishing. She said that she referred to what Brenda was talking about. She said women menstruate. Women are not men. Men are not women. Women have babies, men don't have babies. They're two different species. She didn't last a day. And she was turned on. 300 colleagues in The Guardian signed a petition. This is really shameful. I mean, it's disgusting. It is the primitive lynch mob, but now done without killing. They signed a lynch mob. They signed a petition for her to be sacked, and she actually was made to go. I think she was allowed to resign. And the journalists rejoiced because she doesn't think that men and women are the same. Now, we actually know that another trinity has come into place in the last couple of years, well, 4 years, because it didn't really exist 4 years ago. We had male, women, and now we have transgender. The trinity is now complete. Now, within the definition of transgender, I've been looking at this. They are getting close to 140 different versions of sexual identity. Now, this sexual identity is like making a bird spotting identity, a sexual identity, or train spotting, or car enthusiasm, or appetite for licorice. I'm a licorice licker. There we are. What do we do? That's what I began this talk with. And I haven't got a clue. Every direction I look, I see storm clouds gathering. I see universities capitulating to meaningless slogans. University College Dublin has equality, diversity, and what's inclusiveness. Thank you very much. You should be up here. But that doesn't mean anything. The one thing they're not going to include are stupid people. Well, they shouldn't be including stupid people. And one of the great tragedies of Irish life, not so much German life, is we are downgrading the most important people in any community, apart from pregnant women. And that's just a final point. I've come to pregnant women. The most important person is, and don't say that I'm trying to make an even bigger friend of him than he already is, Kevin Finnerty. He's a man who will connect your toilet to the sewer. He's a man who will give you cold water and hot water. He's the man who will make your life tolerable, long before any journalist will, long before any doctor will, in normal circumstances. So what we're not doing in Irish life is rewarding people we need with unacademic skills. The plumber, the nurse should not be going to a university. These are central characters in a civilization, the civilization which we once were. Declan was so right about the quality of the Irish people. We supplied the world with doctors and nurses, every country in the world, not just English-speaking people, but across Africa, across Asia. There were missionaries, there were nuns, there were priests carrying the message not merely of God and of Jesus Christ and the message of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, but bringing medical aid to people who needed medical aid, who'd never seen medical aid before. And we've turned our backs on all of those people. But in all of the hysteria and the submission, the spineless, undignified, cowardly submission before the conjoined blitz of the media and the government over COVID, the great sin was done to the young women, the young married women, the young pregnant women of Ireland. All those ones who could be developing tumours, who are not being scanned. all those women who were having babies who might be developing problems, who were not being scanned, the women who had the ovarian and other breast cancer and other things. This is the group that should be protected most, and about which the National Women's Council of Ireland never said a word. They never said a word about the need to protect pregnant women, young mothers, the most important people in any society, because that is a politically driven organization whose priorities have moved past raising children. Their priorities are about preventing children through abortion, preventing children through contraception.